Good morning, Bucknutters. It is Wednesday, August 6th, 2025. I am Dan Rubin. This is the Bucknuts Morning Five and Change. This podcast covers the national champions. You may be a tad surprised to see me here on a Wednesday. I'm subbing in for Dave Biddle, has some family stuff to attend to, and the people's champ, Matt Baxendell, will be here in just a minute. If you hear some commotion in the background, hopefully it's not my dog Brad, but we are in the process of having the nest emptied, and the biggest bird is flying the coop this morning, so there's some hubbub in the background. You can follow NYU Men's Hoops on Instagram if you'd like to see how he's doing, but I digress. Here's what I didn't digress about. Vuori, our sponsor. You may be asking yourself, Dan, when are you and Dave getting some free gear from Vuori that you can wear on the air? Good question. We filled the form out. It hasn't gotten here yet, but we did find out that it's not Vuori. It's Vuori, despite how it's spelled. This stuff is athletic chic, incredibly versatile and comfortable, perfect for whatever your day brings. You've seen people walking around with the V logo, designed to look great beyond the gym, whether you're running errands, heading to the office, or just meeting up with friends. The performance jogger, the Dream Knit collection, fitness lounge focus, great for stretching and lounging. Like I said, stylish. Dream Knit fabric, comfort, versatility, inspired by an active lifestyle. And very important, lightweight, relaxed fit, moisture wicking, 4-way performance stretch. And we got a deal for you. 20% off your first purchase. Go to vuori.com, VUORI.com/Bucknuts. 20% off your first purchase. Free shipping on any U.S. orders over $75 and free returns. Visit the website, vuori.com, for full terms and conditions. All right. Fully conditioned. The people's champ, Matt Baxendell, has joined us. Bax, how goes it?
Good morning. How you doing here today, Dan?
Living the dream. All right. Ohio State, if you were to place a bet in Vegas right now, is, albeit slight, the national championship favorite. That said, the media doesn't seem to agree. There's a real Penn State vibe out there. You've always been a good man to quote on the affairs of the Pennsylvania State University, given your roots. Let's take it from a general perspective here, though. You have tackled the Big Ten in the bucket over the last month or so. Bring us up to speed on how you see the conference working out. I'm going to give you the floor for a while here, and you can fit in Ohio State wherever you see fit there.
Well, it's an interesting year. Let's face it, this year, Penn State is the shiniest of the returning objects, right? I mean, national semifinalists last year probably should have made the national title game. They sort of blew it in the semis, and yet another Franklin disaster. I mean, can we all agree Franklining is a term at this point, Dan? Right? Like, it's like the new Clemsoning, right? So,
Oof.
Which Dabo's going to come punch me from off screen because I said the word Clemsoning, but, that was a real thing for a while.
That was a real thing, though.
Yeah. And then, hey, they got rid of it. So the question is, Franklining is a real thing. James Franklin's record in his career against top 10 teams at Penn State is 3-19. And 2 of those wins over the top 10 teams were back in 2016. So Franklin winning a national title to me is just implausible just because of who he is. But we'll get to that. If anybody read the bucket the last few weeks, I've gotten pretty in-depth on the Big Ten's rankings. And, I think Penn State's super talented too. I think their schedule's super favorable. I think that says that they're going to certainly be a playoff team. But winning in the playoff, I just can't pick Penn State to win a national title. There's no way. It's one of those things I have to see it to believe it. You know what I mean? Sure. That's just what it is with them right now. So I do think that the Big Ten is loaded this year. I think top to bottom, it looks like a great league. I think there's some teams that are really on the rise this year. I think the Big Ten once more is going to get 4 teams into the playoff, though. I think just like last year, we're sitting in a position where that's the case. So, I think if let's look at the conference here. There's a lot of interesting choices. So maybe you want me? Let's do the top 5. Maybe I'll go back to my rankings and we can talk it through.
Here's what I'll say.
So,
if you want to see, hold on a sec. If you want to see all of Bax's rankings for the Big Ten, by the way, it's not 10 teams. It's in depth. You can go to the back to the bucket, just search on his name on the site. We're going to break down the top 5 here today in detail. Take it away.
All right. So I'm going to give a quick honorable mention here. I had tied for 6th place, just outside of the top 5, USC and Nebraska. USC is sitting into a very interesting spot for me. Just to mention them real quick, they were very competitive last year in virtually every game. They should be a lot better this year. The problem is they're still playing one of the hardest schedules in the Big Ten. And so I had USC and Nebraska. And Nebraska, if you look historically, Matt Rule in his 3rd season, everywhere he's been, they take a huge jump. They got a quarterback in Raiola who's now got a year under his belt. Both those teams, I thought long and hard about picking them 5th, but I had them tied for 6th in the Big Ten this year. I think they're both going to be very interesting teams to watch. Another team that I also did not have in the top 5 that I do think is going to win 7-8 games this year and still go bowling is going to be Indiana. I think they're going to fall back a little bit from last year's crazy success. 5th, well, I didn't like picking this team 5th, but I picked the team up north as the 5th team in the Big Ten this year. And Dan, there's a few things about this team that I'm sort of very intrigued to watch play out. One, everything could blow up at any point in time, right? Like we're looking at something here where if they get hit with major sanctions, if they get a bowl ban, if Sharon Moore's suspension goes from 2 games to much longer, it could get ugly for them. So this is kind of going out on a limb. This pick is assuming that the NCAA does nothing, and we're still waiting at the end of the year to get this stupid thing out of the way from the giant cheating scandal that was the biggest impediment to the integrity of any North American sport in 100 years. I can't believe we're still talking about this. They should have been nuclear torched by now and starting to try to rebuild, but here we are. The reality is, though, with our rivals is that they have a very, very challenging schedule. There's a handful of games this year that will be very difficult for them. They have to go to Oklahoma, which they're trying to finagle Sharon Moore's suspension for so he can go there because he's an Oklahoma alumni. That's BS. They have to go to Nebraska. Both of those are in September. Both of those are teams travel outside their time zones in the Big Ten. It's not a great win percentage. That's something that's a little scary for sure. And then, by the way, Sparty's going to be better this year. They always play them tough. All 4 of those games are on the road, Dan. And then they, of course, have to play Ohio State in November. At the end of the day, the rest of their schedule, I think they win. But that's 5 games that I see them losing a majority of. So I have Michigan finishing 5th right now. I have them at 8-4 on the season. My God, Ohio State better beat them this year. I don't know what else to say about that. So that's my periphery going into the teams I really think have a chance at winning the Big Ten this year. What do you think, Dan? Does that seem like a pretty good perspective on the top couple teams before we get into the top 4?
I agree with the way you've got it going right now, for sure. Michigan, their defense finished the season well enough that you're going to beat most of the teams on your schedule. I do think it's a fascinating quarterback situation with Bryce Underwood coming in, and then, the strange confluence of circumstances that allowed them to beat Ohio State offensively. You go back and look, it wasn't like they lit it up by any stretch. So I wonder if you can sustain that over an entire season, expect to finish that way they did. But I got no complaints.
I also think it's going to be real interesting starting a true freshman at Nebraska and at Oklahoma in the first month. I mean, that might put them behind the 8 ball pretty good. So they may never really seem like a contender because I think in their first 6, they also have to go to USC. So they could be 3-3 at one point this year. So it'll be interesting to watch them for sure, though. I mean, and yeah, they lost their 2 stud D tackles, which was by far the strength of that team last year. Sure. But that team's defense as a whole wasn't a fluke. I mean, they did beat Alabama in their bowl game. So, All right, let's get to the teams that I think have an awesome chance. These are the 4 teams that I think are going to be the 4 of which 2 will be in the Big Ten championship game. I'm going to start with the one that is this year's surprise team. I think they'll be in the playoff. If you've been paying attention to the Big Ten, this team's got a lot of pieces coming back. I said this in the bucket. I actually have them tied for 3rd in the Big Ten in the regular season, and that's Illinois. It's Brett Bielema's Illinois. And how crazy is it that we're even talking about Illinois competing for a Big Ten championship, much less today's Big Ten? I mean, they've been never really in contention since like that one random Ron Zook year for like the last 20 years. But you know, Illinois won. The Zooker, you would always get the DC recruits. But you know they won 10 games last year? And they beat South Carolina in a bowl game? And Brett Bielema almost got into a fight with Shane Beamer, which was the funniest part of bowl season other than Ohio State making all the other fans cry. That was a good Illinois team last year. That was an Illinois team last year that they beat Michigan, by the way. I was watching that game. It was on Big Ten replay like last week, and I was sitting there going, yeah, Illinois brings back – that's Luke Altmaier. Their schedule also is extremely favorable. They have a schedule that I think fits them very well. And if you look at their stretch of their season, late September into the middle of October, to me, that's going to define what they do. They go September 20th at Indiana. That's going to sort of decide which one of those 2 teams is going to be the surprise contender to me. I think they're going to beat Indiana at Indiana. The next week, USC comes to Illinois. And that's a really hard road trip for USC to go into Illinois. And then after that, 2 weeks later, they host Ohio State. That's right. Ohio State has to go to Illinois. And if Illinois goes 2-2 in those games, which I think USC and all, they're 10-2. They look like they're 10-2 to me. They've got their entire D back. They've got their starting quarterback back. One of the only losses they had was one of their running backs transferred out. He'll be playing down, I think, at Georgia this year. But Bielema's got a loaded team by Illinois standards and a schedule that'll work, man. The reality is I really think that they are going to be right there in the mix. I think they're going to be that 10-2 Big Ten team that the SEC teams are throwing a fit about because they have a bunch of 3-loss teams, and they're going to say, wah, Illinois is like this year's Indiana, blah, blah, blah. But how do you keep them out if their only losses are Ohio State and USC and they're 10-2? They have playoff written all over them. And if they win one of those 2 games, I'm not convinced, by the way, Ohio State wins at Illinois. That's a really tough game, depending on the weather is, depending if it's a night game, all these things. I'm sure it'll be a big noon game because the big noon always takes
I was
the
going to
game.
say,
But
don't get your hopes up.
yeah, maybe there's a more quote-unquote marquee game that day. But if Illinois beats USC 2 weeks before Ohio State goes there is an extremely high chance that is 1 versus 1. They're 1 versus 2 or 1 versus 3. I mean, like that's how that could be. So Illinois is a bona fide, no doubt contender in the Big Ten to me this year. Winning 10 games, I think, is an extremely likely possibility. And I think they're a playoff team. I really do. They've just got everything in place to do it. So, and that's another thing too, Dan. You flashed the thing up there by somebody who said not all Big Ten schedules are created equal. 100,000% true. 100,000% true. And that's a major factor when you're in a league this big with this many good teams and this many blue blood programs. It's just real. Look at last year. Like we all thought Indiana was going to be pretty good last year because their schedule wasn't challenging. And then they were even better than we thought against a weak schedule. Look at what Indiana did. I won't be surprised one bit if Illinois is the exact same thing this year. So,
excuse me, let me hop in here. I agree with you. They are cruising. Listen, Bert can coach. I'm not necessarily saying he's a national championship or even Big Ten title coach, but he's proven wherever he's gone, he can do a good job. He's got a style he likes. Also, I hope that Indiana and Illinois go into that game with a lot to play for because Cignetti Bielema has some real media potential for barbs and tomfoolery. Both those guys have a penchant for going blowhard at a big game, almost in an entertaining way to me. I kind of like that personally. I find that stuff funny and interesting. Let me read our next ad here because it's both interesting and not funny, but valuable, and that is Gooder sunglasses. Dave and I have told you about these forever. Stylish sunnies starting at $25 a pair. You get a year warranty, 30-day free returns. These are the best looking, less expensive sunglasses you can get. They're built for that durable, maybe buy 2 or 3 in case one ends up in the ocean like my kids, as I've said. Lightweight and comfortable, 100% polarized, no slip, no bounce. Lots of styles, lots of colors, men, women, and children. Whether you're going on a run, playing pickleball, which I've never done, on a hike or going to the beach, so affordable, you don't have to worry about losing or breaking them, and you can have a pair for every occasion. Bucknuts Morning 5 listeners get free shipping. Go to gooder.com, goodr.com/Bucknuts, and use code Bucknuts for free shipping, 30-day money-back guarantee, and 100% satisfaction. Backs, as we get into the top schools here, this is where it gets interesting to me. We're about to deal with what I would consider the upper crust of the Big Ten, and I've seen more people pick against the Buckeyes here than I expected. So I'm curious to hear what the People's Champ has to say, though I have an inkling.
Well, I said Illinois was tied for third a minute ago, and they're tied for third, and I have them tied for third with Oregon. So Oregon obviously has a ton of talent. They've recruited as well as anybody in the country the last 5 years, right? This is entirely down to 2 things. And one is that they have some changes on their roster that, it's hard to replace a quarterback. They've lost some pretty high-end players. But 2, more importantly, their schedule has a certain amount of challenge to it. So early on, they have 2 interesting non-conference games. They're hosting Oregon State and Oklahoma State. So if OSU was on the schedule, they'd have had the trio all year, but they're playing Oregon State and Oklahoma State in September. Those are going to be interesting non-con games. I think they'll win both, but they follow that up. To going to Penn State on September 27th. That'll be Penn State's biggest game of the year at home. That's going to be their whiteout. Penn State doesn't have a game the week before. They have an extra week to prepare. Oregon has to go all the way across the country. I think as much as this goes against James Franklin's record, I think Penn State's going to beat Oregon in that game. That is a hinge game this year. Huge. I think that is one of the 3 or 4 biggest games in the Big Ten regular season, I would say, this year. Hands down. And I know James Franklin is 3-19 against top 10 teams. Oregon will certainly be a top 10 team. That just has, with the time zone changes west to east, the home field advantage at Beaver Stadium, the roster Penn State has, I am picking Penn State to beat Oregon in that game. And for everybody watching, please don't think that this is me saying I think Penn State's going to win the Natty, because again, I mentioned I'm not picking them to win a Natty this year. But in the Big Ten, that's a game I think Penn State wins. If James Franklin loses that game in that scenario with everything going for him, can you imagine what the Penn State fan outcry is going to be? Like, Dan, they're way more patient than I think we would have been for what's gone on with Franklin.
Here?
The reality. Yeah.
Dude, Penn State hasn't beaten Ohio State and Michigan the same season since 1994. That would not fly in Columbus. Invertingly somehow.
Penn State hasn't beaten Ohio State in a decade. And every time they lose, it's in choking fashion to Ohio State. Like, there are very few games where it's like, wow, Ohio State was way better. It was, wow, Penn State really could have won that game, but they handed the ball, or they handed the ball off instead of letting Trace McSorley make a play in overtime. Things like that. You're like, what are you? It's not that he loses. It's he loses in excruciatingly stupid fashion, and it's blatantly a coaching decision. So again, I'm almost regretting picking him at this point to win that game now that I'm talking about it more. But I do think Penn State eventually is going to win one, right? Eventually he's going to win a game against a top 10 team. Because his only win since 2016 against top 10 team was in a bowl game against Utah. That's the only win he's had since 2016. So against top 10 team.
There was a flukish special teams play in that game, though.
Oh, the Ohio State game?
Correct.
Yes, the blocked field goal, or he would have never beaten Ohio State.
Yeah.
And it was an Urban said after the game, I knew it was a long kick. I should have called timeout. Like, we all knew that. So
here's what I find really interesting, though. I think One topic that really hasn't been touched on enough is that I think Dan Lanning is also, I wouldn't say he's on a hot seat because I don't see them getting rid of him and they're recruiting like gangbusters, but he's close to being the next guy who needs a big time W to kind of establish the program and not have them be kind of the fly by night kind of Jersey program. Does that make sense to you? I mean, he didn't beat Washington when he had Penix against him. He did. Lord knows he didn't beat Ohio State in the playoff last year, and their win over Ohio State, he got a ton of credit for with his little coaching kerfuffle there at the end. So both those guys, whoever wins that game is going to be anointed temporarily, but whoever loses is going to be under the gun.
Yeah, I would agree that this is one where there's different expectations, right? Penn State fans want Franklin to finally just do something. Like they're poking him with a stick and going, do something, right? Whereas I think Lanning's got a little more street cred, for the lack of a better term. You know what I mean?
Earlier on in his tenure, too.
Yeah, I mean, in 3 seasons, he's like 35-6. Last year alone, he beat, 2 top 10 teams, and that was Ohio State and Penn State. Not to mention they blew out Illinois, who I've been talking up. That was just last year. The season didn't end the way they wanted it to, right? Like, I get that. But I think Lanning's pressure is coming from Phil Knight, who in his dotage really wants a national title more than anything. I think that's the pressure on him. I think his pressure is a little different.
Yeah. No, you bring up a good point because we cited Michigan not beating Ohio State and Michigan in the same season since 1994, and Oregon did it last year. So very impressive.
So Oregon's got it. They're a good team. I mean, there's no doubt about it. They've recruited their brains out. If you look at the rest of their schedule, I think it's very manageable. Indiana has to go out to Oregon this year. Their trips east are way easier than I thought they should be. They have to go to Rutgers. Come on, Oregon's going to beat Rutgers. They have to go to Northwestern. Okay, come on. Northwestern is one of the worst teams in the Big Ten. And so the only really scary road game that they have after Penn State is they have to go to Iowa. That one's going to be interesting because Iowa's going to be good this year. That'll be very interesting. And then that's their end of their season schedule. I could see them in Penn State it being their only loss. They're 8-1 in November. They're a major contender. They have to go to Iowa. Then they host Minnesota, then USC in back-to-back weeks. I've talked about USC. USC doesn't have to have a time zone change to go to Oregon either. USC is going to be interestingly close to the mix. I have all those teams as bowl teams, and then they finish up at Washington. That's a big rivalry game for them. I think they drop one of those last 4. So I have Oregon finishing 10-2 this year, and I think that keeps them out of the Big Ten championship. But I still think that they are a clear playoff team. I still think they're going to be very much a contender. If they win one at Penn State, or if they don't drop one of those challenging games down the stretch, they could easily be in the Big Ten championship again. So I have them finishing tied for 3rd with Illinois. I think they're right there. But I think the 2 teams ahead of them are the 2 teams that, based on schedule and talent, are the teams to look. And
I'm
of
with
course,
you on that. Yeah. Take it and run with it.
Well, the 2 teams at the top, that leaves us with Ohio State and Penn State. And look, it's not a surprise that Penn State's up here, guys. So everybody's asking these questions. At the end of the day, this is last year. Penn State made the Big Ten championship game too. And look, Penn State, their biggest issue last year to me, other than James Franklin, who's always their biggest issue, was the fact that they didn't have a wide receiver worth a damn who could catch a football. I mean, no offense to old friend Julian Fleming, but I mean, they famously in the playoff didn't have a receiver catch a pass in one of the games. The only guy who could catch a pass in their team was either the running backs out of the backfield or Tyler Warren. So these are things that, I'm definitely looking at like, hey, what are we doing here, Penn State? But they did make some big updates. They did go into the portal. They got a couple guys that can actually play at receiver. Trevor Pena came away from Syracuse last year with almost 1,000 yards receiving with Honda McCord throwing him the ball. They picked up Kyron Hudson from USC. Those are some pieces that make that wide receiver position much, much better. And if you look at the rest of the roster, top to bottom, it's a good team. And their schedule is virtually everything that they want. They don't play Michigan or USC. They have Oregon at home. They have Indiana at home. They have Nebraska at home. And their only really two challenging road games are at Ohio State and at Iowa. So this is hard to get past the fact it's a James Franklin team. To be real, Dan, this Penn State team has they lose at Ohio State and Columbus like usual, and then win every other game written all over it to me. I'm giving them, I said already, credit in beating Oregon. So that means I have Penn State finishing at 11-1 this year and going to the Big Ten championship game. The kicker is that means they're playing Ohio State in the Big Ten championship game, because I see the Buckeyes there too. The Buckeyes have 4 games to me that I think are going to be make or break on the season. That's Texas, obviously, even though it doesn't impact the Big Ten. You win that first game, that's a big statement kind of thing. It's a tiebreaker kind of thing between the conferences almost, because those are the 2 biggest name brands. It's a rematch of the national semifinal. I don't buy Arch Manning. I'm picking Ohio State in that game. I just do. I think I've not bought the hype from him from the start. If his last name was Johnson, he wouldn't have been the number 1 quarterback in the country. I'm sorry. There's a bias there because it's a Manning, period. And so after that, the big 3 games in the Big Ten are at Illinois, Penn State, and at Michigan. And I'll throw it out there too. You go to Washington and Wisconsin back-to-back weeks. So those are interesting. Washington's the first road game for whoever the new starting quarterback is, likely Julian Sayin. That's interesting.
Tough schedule, man.
That's interesting to me. So Texas aside, doesn't impact the Big Ten though. You've got to go to Illinois. You've got to go to Washington. You've got to go to Wisconsin, even though I don't think Wisconsin's going to be very good this year. And you have to go to Ann Arbor. And let's face it, there's a big bugaboo right now on that. So I don't think Ohio State goes undefeated. I don't know who they lose to. I do think they beat Penn State and Columbus. I don't know if that loss is Illinois. I don't know if that loss is Washington. I don't know if that loss is, God forbid, Michigan. But I think they drop one somewhere. That's kind of where my head is on it. But based on everything that I've talked through here, that leaves only 2 teams in the Big Ten at 8-1. So Ohio State and Penn State would be the 2 teams at 8-1, returning to the Big Ten championship game. And unless I have some people are going to tell me, Bax, you didn't mention that trip to Purdue. Okay. We've all been scarred by going to West Lafayette on the road at night. I was literally at the game that we lost to them when Haskins threw for 400 yards and we still lost by 3 TDs. I was there. Trust me, I know how scary that place is, but I also have seen Purdue's team this year, and it's a horrific team. So I'm not worried about that. But Dan, here's the thing that scares me now. I just picked a Big Ten championship game of Ohio State and Penn State. Both those teams are going to the playoff, all that. That's a rematch. Do you remember the bucket I wrote before the Rose Bowl about major rematches in the history of college football? Let me give you a little refresher on this for everyone. I went back and I looked at what I called, quote, major rematches in the history of college football in championship in bowl games. And after Ohio State beat Oregon, again, rematch. The team that loses the first game is 8-2 in the rematches and major games. 8-2. So either James Franklin is historically bad and is the standout of standouts on that front, or I have to logically pick Penn State to win the Big Ten. Can you imagine that? So that's where I landed in the bucket. As insane as it seems, I think Penn State would win a rematch scenario just because history tells me that the loser of the first game, which would be Penn State at Ohio State, would win the rematch. So I have literally talked myself into picking Penn State to win the Big Ten this year for that exact reason. Even though I don't think Penn State's going to win the Natty, although I do think there's a very strong chance Ohio State and Penn State would play somewhere in that playoff, and Ohio State would certainly win the rubber match. But I can't logically go against what I'm being told here. I'm giving Franklin credit for winning not 1 but 2 games against top 10 teams this year. That's maybe a bridge too far. I might be crazy. But which history wins? James Franklin's nervousness against top 10 teams, or the fact that the winner of the first game, that rematch, is almost universally loses? And we just watched it in action with Ohio State, Oregon last year. I have to go with what I'm seeing there historically. And James Franklin has to prove he's a historically bad big game coach in that scenario. So I landed on Penn State beating Ohio State to win the Big Ten this year. Shoot me.
I'm gonna read our final ad, and then I'm gonna respond to that, Bax. I've got to gather my thoughts for such an outlandish comment. I'm just kidding. Cornbread hemp, you know it, you love it. America's first ever USDA organic THC gummy. Healthy happy hour, man. Those of you trying to kick the booze or pull back a little bit, 1-to-1 THC to CBD ratio, just 10 milligrams of THC per gummy for just the right dose. No harsh solvents, no synthetic ingredients. And of course, Bucknuts Morning 5 listeners, you can get 30% off your first order. Just visit cornbreadhemp.com/Bucknuts and use promo code Bucknuts at checkout. 30% off your first order. Cheers to a happier, healthy hour. Okay, let's talk about Penn State here. I think let's establish what we agree on here. Would you agree that and I think you did, you already stated this, so I'm kind of rehashing this, but the biggest issue for Penn State when they were matched up against their peers last year was an inability to separate at wide receiver and threaten the defense, etc. Because if we really go back and are honest, Ohio State made enough mistakes in that game for Penn State to win it. If you remember Will's fumble at the goal line, that was ridiculous. And then their decision not to use Tyler Warren as the Wildcat inside in the red zone there at the end, which I literally don't know how that's even possible. But he was the best player, I thought, on their offense pretty clearly. They have good backs, but the issue is at receiver. And like you mentioned, they brought in Kyron Hudson from USC. They brought in Trevor Pena from Syracuse. And the other is Devontae Ross from Troy. And if you look at their depth chart, they're starting one transfer at linebacker, Amari Campbell on defense, and then 3 of those guys at wide receiver, and the rest are homegrown or at least have been there for at least a year. So what everyone is saying is Kyron Hudson, Devontae Ross, and Trevor Pena are going to be the difference. Here's the reason I can't go for that. I don't think either one of those 3 guys would crack Ohio State's depth chart at wide receiver. So how is that possible that that's going to be the difference if you've in no way equaled the playing field at receiver? So here's another thing. Drew Aller is a fine Ohioan. That said, I have not seen yet what I need to see to put fear into me the way it usually is when we're going to lose the national championship. There was a time in the loss at Oregon last year when literally every time Dylan Gabriel dropped back, I thought he was going to complete a pass. That feeling of helplessness that you get. I've never had that with Aller. I could be wrong. But I think this is a narrative push because Michigan brought a bunch of dudes back and won the title. Ohio State brought a bunch of dudes back and won the title. Drew Aller is back and they won the title, but Tyler Warren's gone and Abdul Carter are gone. Those are the 2 best players on the team. So I don't see why we are pumping them up to this level. I get it. I just don't necessarily agree with this. So I think Ohio State will be in good shape. I guess just being the publisher of Bucknuts, I never usually pick them to lose a game because even if I say, they're going to lose a game, when I start to break it down game by game, my nuttiness kicks in and I'm like, they're not going to lose this. And so I'm super confident that they'll go undefeated. That said, it is a very difficult schedule. Very, very difficult. So even so, like injuries could be an issue. Injuries were an issue last year. Football injuries aren't a variable. They're a constant. You're going to have injuries. So I'm very confident in the Buckeyes. I mean, I get that quarterback is semi-unproven. Heading into last season, there were a lot of doubters surrounding Big Will Howard. Don't forget that. There were people saying he was run out of Kansas State for the I can't remember the dude's name, the long-haired athletic guy.
He's a freshman, yeah.
Right. So we'll see. But I get it. I cannot put into words how big that game is for Penn State versus Oregon.
Yes.
Because if Ohio State beats Texas, they're going to be number one. I think you can pretty much guarantee the winner of that game is going to have the early be on serve at number one until they lose again. So that one I got to see. I got to see Penn State do this, like you said. Franklin has done a really good job, except, and the idea that we would just say they're going to be able to do, what's happened? Who is the player that's supposed to put fear into me that wasn't there before? I don't see it. Now, those three receivers are definitely better than the guys. Again, Kyron Hudson, Devontae Ross, and Trevor Pena. If you look at their depth chart, different color than the rest of the group on our lads. So I get it. But they didn't go to the NFL. And if you're that good, that receiver, I would think you're going to do that. So I defer to your Pennsylvania roots here. Those who don't know that you're a true native, and I put true in air quotes. I just don't see it.
It's a really
Go ahead.
It's a really good point you make there, but I will throw this out there. They don't have to be better than Ohio State's receivers. They just have to be much better than what Penn State had last year. In terms of putting fear into people, I'd throw out that they have the best pair of running backs in the country. And Allen, Katron Allen is just I've always been a big fan of him. And then Singleton, I think, actually outrushed him last year. So we just watched the best tandem of tailbacks in the country last year, win a national title. That whole line is back. I agree with you. Aller doesn't strike a ton of fear in my heart, but he puts up good numbers. This is the first time he's had competent receivers. But you're right. It comes back to one basic thing. Can James Franklin get out of his own way? That is really what this comes down to. I certainly don't. Like I said, I'm picking Ohio State to beat them in the horseshoe. And I agree with you. I look at any of these individual games, and Ohio State should be the favorite. There's not one game I sit here and go, we should lose that game. There's not one. Now, over the course of the season, those odds stack up, and the league is good as the Big Ten. It's just the reality, right? It's very, 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 very difficult to go undefeated. And I'm with you. I have to see it to believe it. But if I didn't know that, if I hadn't done all that research before the Oregon game about historical rematches, I'd have giggled it off and picked Ohio State to beat Penn State twice and laughed my way to the bank and said, this is so funny. I can't wait to watch Franklin lose twice to Ohio State, which, by the way, might happen. And if it does, would be the funniest thing ever. And by the way, it'd be so on brand for him. But history says it doesn't happen. That's the only reason I'm picking Penn State. So we're going to find out if we get into this scenario. Is James Franklin maybe the worst coach in history in big games? I mean, that literally is going to be the conversation if this is the Big Ten championship game and this plays out anything like the way I see it. If it's Ohio State, Penn State in the Big Ten championship and Ohio State wins the first game ever in the series, right? This could easily be the conversation of the Big Ten championship. Is James Franklin the worst big game coach in history? Because if he can't win that game against Ohio State and loses twice in a season to a team that he just cannot beat, like the Penn State people might just, as good as he's been otherwise, they might just gas him on the spot. They're in full Bo Pelini mode with him right now where they're like, this isn't quite good enough, but we don't want to get rid of him because he's successful. If he can't beat Ohio State twice in the season, that's a whole different conversation. So I will say this. I think we probably can agree. Penn State is the most fascinating team in the Big Ten this year to watch play out just because of the drama surrounding James Franklin.
This is going to be great synergy, but I was just thinking of how I'm going to end the show. And one thing you know about college football in the Big Ten, there's going to be a ton of super compelling drama, real life stuff that's going to be tremendous. That's why sports is the best, and they sell it on the field, so it's tremendous. We appreciate Bax stopping by and putting through the effort here. We'll be back tomorrow to talk to the People's Champ and the Grand Poobah. Do you think Ohio State will win the Big Ten? Let's hear about it in the comments. Have a good one. Nutters of Buck.
Go Bucks.